The head of the Korean Mafia was secretly following his maid, and what he found out made him fall in love with her. If you love stories of forbidden romance and dangerous secrets, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. Now, let's begin. Seoul, South Korea, a city of glittering lights and hidden shadows, and in the darkest corners of this metropolis, one name commanded absolute fear and respect: Kang Jae-won. At 32 years old, Jae-won was the youngest leader the Baeko Syndicate had ever known. His rise to power had been written in blood and sealed with betrayal. They called him the Ghost of Gangnam because when he decided someone needed to disappear, they simply vanished. But power, he had learned, was a lonely throne. His penthouse sat atop one of Seoul's tallest buildings, a fortress of glass and steel that overlooked the city he controlled. 63 floors above the chaos of the streets, Jae-won lived in pristine silence. Everything in his life was calculated, controlled, precise. Everything except her. Park Soo-min arrived at the Kang penthouse on a rainy Tuesday morning, clutching a worn folder containing her employment documents. She was 25 years old, with simple clothes and tired eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. The agency had sent her as a replacement after the previous housekeeper had quit without notice. Nobody lasted long in the Kang household. The rumors about the owner were enough to send most running, but Soo-min couldn't afford to run. She needed this job more than she needed her pride. More than she needed her safety. What she carried in her heart was worth any risk. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, and Soo-min stepped into a world she had only seen in magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the sprawling cityscape. The furniture was minimal but impossibly expensive, all clean lines and muted colors. The air itself seemed different here, cleaner somehow, as if even the atmosphere knew its place. A man in a crisp black suit approached her. His face was neutral, unreadable. "You are the new housekeeper?" he asked. His voice was cold, efficient. Soo-min bowed deeply. "Yes, Park Soo-min. The agency sent me." The man studied her for a long moment. "I am Secretary Yoon. I manage Mr. Kang's household affairs. You will follow the rules exactly as I explain them. There will be no second chances. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Secretary Yoon handed her a printed sheet. "These are your duties and restrictions. Mr. Kang values his privacy above all else. You will not speak to him unless spoken to. You will not enter his study under any circumstances. You will not ask questions about his business. You will not have visitors. You will not use your phone during working hours. You will not—" "I understand," Soo-min interrupted quietly. "I am here to work, nothing more." Secretary Yoon's eyebrow twitched slightly at the interruption, but he said nothing. He simply nodded and gestured for her to follow. The tour of the penthouse took 20 minutes. The kitchen was a marvel of modern technology. The living areas were pristine. The guest rooms were never used. And at the end of a long hallway, a heavy wooden door remained firmly closed. "The study," Secretary Yoon said. "You do not clean it. You do not touch it. You do not look at it. Understood?" Soo-min nodded. "Good. Mr. Kang is rarely home during the day. Your shift begins at 6 in the morning and ends at 8 in the evening. You will have Sundays off. Your quarters are in the service area behind the kitchen. Is everything clear?" "Yes, sir." "Then you may begin." And just like that, Park Soo-min's new life began. For the first 2 weeks, Soo-min barely saw her employer. Kang Jae-won was a ghost in his own home, leaving before dawn and returning well past midnight. She only knew he existed from the evidence he left behind: a coffee cup in the sink, a jacket draped over a chair, the faint scent of expensive cologne that lingered in certain rooms. She cleaned, she cooked, she maintained the penthouse in perfect order. And when her shift ended, she retreated to her small room and counted the days until her first paycheck. But if Soo-min thought she was invisible in the Kang household, she was mistaken. Jae-won noticed her from the very first day. He had watched her through the security cameras as she entered his home, had studied the way she bowed too deeply, the way her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the rules from Secretary Yoon. He had expected another nervous, disposable employee who would flee within a month. But there was something different about this one. It was in her eyes. Behind the exhaustion, behind the careful submission, there was a fire, a determination. A secret. Jae-won had built his empire on reading people, on identifying their weaknesses and exploiting them. He could smell a lie from across a room. He could sense betrayal before it was even conceived. And everything about Park Soo-min told him she was hiding something. The question was, what? The first time they spoke was 3 weeks after her arrival. Soo-min was in the kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, preparing breakfast as she always did. She had learned that Jae-won preferred traditional Korean breakfast, simple dishes made with precision. She was arranging the banchan when she felt a presence behind her. She turned and froze. Kang Jae-won stood in the doorway, watching her. He was dressed in a dark suit, his black hair perfectly styled, his face betraying nothing. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, seemed to pierce right through her. "You're early," he said. His voice was low, smooth, dangerous. Soo-min bowed quickly. "I apologize if I disturbed you, sir. I didn't realize you were home. I'm always home." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Jae-won moved into the kitchen, and Soo-min instinctively stepped back. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot she had prepared. "Most housekeepers don't last that long. I need the job, sir." "Why?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it was immense. Soo-min felt her heart rate increase. She had prepared for this, had rehearsed her answers 100 times. "I have debts to pay," she said carefully. "Family obligations." Jae-won sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. "Family obligations," he repeated. "That's a very vague answer." "It's the truth, sir." "Is it?" Silence stretched between them. Soo-min kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped in front of her. She could feel him analyzing her, dissecting her, searching for the crack in her armor. Finally, he set down his cup. "Breakfast looks good," he said, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with her racing heart and trembling hands. After that morning, Jae-won began to appear more frequently. At first, it seemed coincidental. He would be in the living room when she came to dust. He would pass through the kitchen while she was cooking. He would return from his study just as she was finishing the hallway. But there was nothing coincidental about Kang Jae-won. Secretary Yoon noticed the change immediately. In the 5 years he had served the Kang family, he had never seen Jae-won show interest in any of the household staff. They were invisible to him, interchangeable, disposable. But now his employer was asking questions. "The new housekeeper," Jae-won said one evening, not looking up from his documents. "What do you know about her?" Secretary Yoon consulted his tablet. "Park Soo-min, 25 years old, born in Busan, moved to Seoul 4 years ago. No criminal record, no known affiliations. She worked at a restaurant before the agency hired her. Her references were satisfactory. Family, parents deceased. No siblings according to her file. She listed no emergency contacts." Jae-won frowned slightly. No emergency contacts, no family, no connections. On paper, Park Soo-min was exactly what she appeared to be. A lonely young woman trying to survive in a harsh city. But Jae-won hadn't survived this long by trusting paper. "Have her followed," he said. Secretary Yoon hesitated. "Sir, if I may ask, is there a specific concern?" Jae-won finally looked up, and there was something in his eyes that Secretary Yoon couldn't quite identify. It wasn't suspicion, not entirely. It was something else, something that looked almost like curiosity. "No specific concern," Jae-won said. "I just want to know who's living in my home." "Understood, sir. I'll arrange surveillance immediately." The reports began arriving within days. Park Soo-min left the penthouse every Sunday at precisely 9 in the morning. She took the subway to a neighborhood in the eastern part of Seoul, a modest area far from the gleaming towers of Gangnam. She would enter a small building and not emerge for several hours. "It's an apartment complex," Secretary Yoon reported. "Unit 402. The lease is under the name Kim Yoon-ji." "Who is Kim Yoon-ji?" "We're still investigating." Jae-won leaned back in his chair, turning a pen over in his fingers. "What else?" "She visits a pharmacy twice a week. The purchases are unusual. Prescription medications, but the quantities suggest they're not for her." "What kind of medications?" Secretary Yoon checked his notes. "Primarily treatments associated with chronic illness, heart conditions specifically." The pen stopped moving in Jae-won's hand. "Continue the surveillance," he said. "I want to know everything." Soo-min was unaware that she was being watched. She moved through her days with the same careful routine, cleaning and cooking and maintaining the perfect silence that Mr. Kang seemed to require. But on Sundays, she allowed herself to be someone else. She would wake early and choose her nicest clothes. Nothing fancy, but clean and bright. She would take the subway across the city, watching the neighborhoods change from wealthy to modest to worn. And when she finally reached that small apartment on the 4th floor, she would become the person she truly was. "Soo-min Uni." The door flew open, and a small body crashed into her legs. Soo-min laughed, the first genuine sound of joy she had made all week. "Hello, my precious one," she said, kneeling down to embrace the child. "Have you been good this week?" The little girl, barely 5 years old, nodded enthusiastically. "I helped Grandma make soup, and I learned a new song at school. Want to hear it?" "I want to hear everything." Soo-min lifted the child into her arms and carried her inside, where an elderly woman was rising slowly from a chair. Kim Yoon-ji was 72 years old, and the toll of her illness was evident in her thin frame and pale complexion. but her eyes were warm as she watched the two young women embrace. "You're too thin," Yoonji said immediately. "Are they not feeding you at that job?" "I'm fine, Grandma. Please sit down. You shouldn't be standing so much." "I'm old, not dead. I can stand in my own home." But she sat anyway, and Soo-min noticed the slight wince she tried to hide. The heart condition was getting worse. The medications were barely maintaining stability. The doctors had been clear. Without proper treatment, without a surgery that cost more money than they would ever have, Yoonji's time was limited, and so Soo-min worked. She worked in a place that scared her, for a man who terrified her, because this woman and this child were all she had left in the world. Yoonji was not her grandmother by blood. Soo-min's parents had died when she was 15, victims of a factory accident that had also killed 3 other workers. No compensation was ever paid. No justice was ever served. Soo-min had been alone, homeless, starving, when Eunji found her sleeping in a park. The old woman had taken her in without question, had fed her, clothed her, sent her to school, had loved her when no one else would. And the child, this beautiful girl with her mother's eyes, she was the daughter of Yoonji's own granddaughter, a young woman who had died in childbirth 3 years ago. The father had vanished long before the baby was born, and so the 2 survivors, an old woman with a failing heart and a young orphan with nothing to offer, had become a family. "Did you bring the medicine?" Yoonji asked quietly, after the little girl had run off to find a drawing she wanted to show Soo-min. Soo-min nodded, pulling a small bag from her purse. "It's getting harder to afford," she admitted. "But I got this month's supply. You're working too hard." "I'm working exactly as hard as I need to." Yoonji reached out and took her hand. "I worry about you, child. That place you work. Those people. I've heard stories." "Stories are just stories, Grandma. I clean a rich man's house. That's all." "Is it?" Soo-min forced a smile. "It is. Now tell me about Ha-yoon's school. Did she pass her test?" The subject was changed, but the worry in Eunji's eyes remained. Jae-won read the final surveillance report in his study. The door locked, the room silent. Park Soo-min was not what she appeared. She was not a simple housekeeper with debts to pay. She was a woman carrying an impossible burden, supporting an elderly woman who was not her relative, and a child who was not her daughter, spending every one she earned on medicine and rent and school fees. She was working herself to exhaustion for people who had no claim on her except love, and she had never said a word about it. Jae-won set down the report and stared at the wall. In his world, everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. Loyalty was bought, and love was a weakness to be exploited. He had learned these lessons early and had built his life around them. But this woman, this ordinary, exhausted, stubborn woman, she confused him. Why would she sacrifice so much for people who weren't even her family? Why would she work in a place that clearly frightened her without ever complaining? Why did she have such fire in her eyes when she should have been broken by life years ago? He wanted to understand her. No, he needed to understand her. Because if she was truly what she appeared to be, then she was something Jae-won had long stopped believing existed. Something good. The next morning, Jae-won found Soo-min in the kitchen as usual. But this time, instead of leaving after a few cold words, he sat down at the table. She froze mid-motion, the ladle suspended over a pot of soup. "Sir, is something wrong with the breakfast?" "Sit down," he said. "I'm sorry." "Sit down." It wasn't a request. Soo-min set down the ladle with trembling hands and lowered herself into the chair across from him. She kept her eyes on the table, her heart pounding. Jae-won studied her for a long moment. "How long have you been taking care of them?" The color drained from her face. I don't know what you mean, sir." "Kim Yoonji, the child. How long?" Soo-min's hands clenched in her lap. This was it. He knew. He knew everything. She had been so careful, but he knew. And now she would lose her job, and then she would lose them. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't fire me. I'll work harder. I'll do anything. I need this job. I'm not going to fire you." She looked up, shocked. Jae-won's face was as unreadable as ever, but there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Something almost soft. 10 years, she said finally. "I've been taking care of Grandma Yoonji for 10 years. Ha-yoon came 3 years ago when her mother died. They're not your family. They're all the family I have." The words hung in the air between them. Jae-won felt something shift in his chest, something he couldn't identify and wasn't sure he wanted to. "Why didn't you put it on your application?" he asked. "A sick relative and a child would have made you a more sympathetic candidate." Soo-min shook her head. "People don't want employees with complications. I've been turned down from jobs before because they thought I would be unreliable, that I would miss work or be distracted. I couldn't risk it again. So you lied." I omitted. "There's a difference." A ghost of a smile crossed Jae-won's face. "Is there?" Soo-min met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. "Yes. Lying is saying something false. Omitting is just not saying everything true. I never lied to you, Mr. Kang. I do have debts. I do have obligations. I just didn't explain why. Jae-won leaned back in his chair. This woman, this simple housekeeper, was arguing semantics with the head of the Beko syndicate. She should have been begging for forgiveness, for mercy. Instead, she was defending her honor with the same fire he had seen in her eyes from the first day. The old woman is sick, he said. Yes. The treatments are expensive. Yes. Your salary isn't enough. Sumin's jaw tightened. I'm managing. Are you? She didn't answer because they both knew the truth. She wasn't managing. She was drowning. Every month was a calculation of which bills to delay, which meals to skip, which medicines were absolutely essential. She was one emergency away from losing everything. Jae-won stood. Come with me, sir. Now. He walked out of the kitchen without waiting to see if she would follow. After a moment of hesitation, she did. He led her through the penthouse to the heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. The study. The forbidden room. Secretary Yoon's warnings echoed in her head as Jae-won pushed open the door and gestured for her to enter. Sumin stepped inside and stopped. She didn't know what she had expected. Weapons, perhaps. Evidence of crimes. Something dark and terrible that matched the rumors about this man. Instead, she found a library. The walls were lined with books, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The shelves reached the ceiling, with a rolling ladder to access the highest volumes. A large desk sat near the window, neat and organized, with a single lamp and a leather chair. And on the desk, a photograph. Jae-won noticed where her eyes had landed. My mother, he said. She died when I was 12. Sumin looked at the photo. A beautiful woman with kind eyes, her arm around a young boy who had not yet learned to hide his emotions. She was sick for a long time. Jae-won continued. My father refused to get her proper treatment, said it was too expensive, said she was weak. His voice was flat, controlled, but Sumin could hear the ancient rage beneath the surface. I promised myself that I would never let money be the reason someone I cared about suffered. He turned to face her. I'm going to pay for the old woman's treatment. Sumin stared at him. What? Her surgery? Her medications? Everything. I'll pay for it. I don't understand. Why would you? Because I can. Because you work for me, which makes your problems my problems. Because... He stopped, something flickering across his face. Because you remind me of someone I used to be. Before all of this. Sumin's eyes filled with tears. I can't accept that. Sir, I can't. It's too much. The surgery alone costs. I know what it costs. I don't care what it costs. He stepped closer and for the first time, his voice gentled. You've been carrying this alone for 10 years. Let someone help you. But why? You don't even know me. Jae-won looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I'd like to, he said quietly, if you'll let me. The surgery was scheduled for the following month. Sumin tried to argue, to negotiate, to at least set up some kind of payment plan. Jae-won refused every attempt. The money, he said, was nothing to him, less than nothing. What mattered was that the old woman would live, and that Sumin would stop slowly killing herself with stress and exhaustion. In the weeks leading up to the surgery, everything changed. Jae-won began coming home earlier. He would sit in the kitchen while Sumin cooked, asking her questions about her life, her past, her hopes for the future. He told her about his own history, about growing up in the shadow of his father's violence, about clawing his way to the top of an organization he sometimes hated. They talked for hours. Secretary Yoon watched these developments with growing concern. Sir, he said one evening when Sumin had retired to her room, I feel I should remind you of the risks of involvement with household staff. Jae-won didn't look up from his book. What risks would those be? She could be a plant, a spy from another organization, someone sent to gather information or create a vulnerability. She's not. With respect, sir, how can you be certain? Jae-won finally raised his eyes. Because I know. I've read every report. I've watched her every move. I've spoken to her every day for weeks. Park Soo-min is exactly what she appears to be. A good person in an impossible situation, doing her best to survive. And that's precisely what a well-trained operative would appear to be. Secretary Yoon. Jae-won's voice hardened. I appreciate your concern, but this matter is not up for discussion. Is that understood? Secretary Yoon bowed stiffly. Understood, sir. But he didn't stop watching, and he wasn't the only one. The surgery was a success. Sumin received the call from the hospital while she was cleaning the living room. She answered on the second ring, her heart in her throat, and listened as the doctor explained that the procedure had gone perfectly. Yoonji was recovering well. She would need rest and rehabilitation, but her prognosis was excellent. Sumin hung up the phone and burst into tears. That was how Jae-won found her, collapsed on his designer sofa, sobbing into her hands. He stood in the doorway for a moment, uncertain, then crossed the room and sat beside her. Good news or bad? He asked. Good. She looked up at him, her face wet and shining. Good news. She's going to be okay. Because of you, she's going to be okay. Before she could stop herself, before she could think about what she was doing, she threw her arms around him. Jae-won went rigid. When was the last time someone had embraced him? Not for show, not for manipulation, but simply because they were happy and wanted to share that happiness with him. He couldn't remember. Slowly, hesitantly, he wrapped his arms around her. She was warm and soft and real, and she smelled like the kitchen and the cleaning products she used and something else, something that was just her. He closed his eyes and let himself hold her, let himself be held, and felt something inside him that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. Soo-min pulled back suddenly, horror dawning on her face. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. That was completely inappropriate. I shouldn't have. Jae-won. She blinked. What? My name is Jae-won. You can use it. I couldn't possibly. You just hugged me. I think we're past formal titles. A surprised laugh escaped her, and she quickly covered her mouth. I really am sorry. I was just so happy, and you were there, and… Soo-min. He reached out and gently lowered her hand from her face. Don't apologize for being happy. Don't apologize for showing emotion. In this house with me, you don't have to be anyone other than who you are. She stared at him. This man who commanded armies of criminals, who had killed and ordered killings, whose name made grown men tremble with fear. And all she could see was the lonely boy in the photograph, the one whose mother had died because his father didn't think she was worth saving. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. You don't need to thank me. I do. No one has ever… She trailed off, shaking her head. You're not what I expected, Jae-won. Neither are you. They sat in silence for a moment, the space between them charged with something new, something neither of them was ready to name. Finally, Soo-min stood. I should finish cleaning. Jae-won nodded, but as she walked away, he called out, Soo-min. She turned. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not as employee and employer, just dinner. Her heart skipped a beat. Yes, I'd like that. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face, and Soo-min felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She was falling for him, and she was terrified. Dinner became a regular occurrence. Every evening, after her work was done, Soo-min would change into something nicer than her cleaning uniform and join Jae-won in the dining room. Sometimes Secretary Yoon would cook. Sometimes they would order in. Sometimes Soo-min would make something herself, and Jae-won would watch her with an expression that made her cheeks warm. They talked about everything. Soo-min told him about her parents, about the accident, about the years of loneliness before Yoonji found her. She told him about Ha-eun, about watching her grow, about the fear of not being able to provide for her. She told him her dreams, small and practical ones, of saving enough money for a real apartment, of sending Ha-eun to a good school, of growing old and watching that little girl become a woman. Jae-won told her things he had never told anyone. He told her about the day he took over the syndicate, the blood on his hands that had never quite washed clean. He told her about the nightmares that still haunted him, the faces of people he had hurt, the weight of every decision he had ever made. He told her about the isolation of leadership, about how every relationship in his life was transactional, how he had forgotten what it felt like to be truly known. You're the first person who's looked at me without fear, he said one night. Everyone else sees the title, the power, the danger. You see, I don't know what you see. I see a man, Soo-min said simply. A complicated man who has done terrible things and carries the weight of them. A man who could have let his past destroy him but didn't. A man who saved my grandmother's life for no reason except that he could. I had reasons. Did you? He looked at her across the table, candles flickering between them, and felt his carefully constructed walls crumble a little more. I'm falling in love with you, he said. The words hung in the air. Soo-min's breath caught. Jae-won, I know I shouldn't. I know this can't end well. I know that my world is dangerous and dark, and that you deserve someone who can give you a normal life. But I can't stop it. I tried. I can't. Soo-min stood slowly and walked around the table. She knelt beside his chair and took his hands in hers. I'm not asking for normal, she said. I'm not asking for safe. I'm just asking for you, whatever that means, whatever that brings. You don't know what you're saying. The syndicate, my enemies, the constant danger. I know exactly what I'm saying. She reached up and touched his face, and he leaned into her palm like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water. I've been surviving my whole life, Jae-won. For once I want to live, and when I'm with you, I feel alive. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she would shatter. But she pulled him closer, and the kiss deepened, and all the walls they had built around themselves came crashing down. When they finally separated, both breathless, Jae-won rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything, he said. I know. There will be people who try to use you against me, people who will see you as a weakness. Then we'll face them together. He laughed, a sound of pure wonder. How are you so brave? I'm not brave. I'm just too stubborn to be afraid. He kissed her again, and this time, neither of them held back. The news spread through the syndicate like wildfire. The ghost of Gangnam had taken a lover. Not a socialite, not a power player, a housekeeper, a nobody from nowhere with no connections and no leverage. The reaction was mixed. Some of Jaewon's men thought it was weakness, proof that their leader had gone soft. They whispered in corners and exchanged meaningful glances, wondering if perhaps it was time for new leadership. Others saw it differently. They had watched Jaewon for years, had served him loyally, and had seen the toll that isolation was taking. If this woman made him happy, if she gave him something to fight for beyond mere power, then perhaps she was exactly what he needed. Secretary Yoon fell somewhere in between. He had been with the Kang family since Jaewon's father was in charge. He had watched Jaewon grow from a beaten child into a ruthless leader. He had seen many things, but he had never seen his employer smile the way he smiled when Park Soo-min was in the room. "You're worried," Jaewon said one morning, catching Secretary Yoon's expression. "It's not my place to be worried, sir. It is your place to speak freely. You always have." Secretary Yoon hesitated, then nodded. "I'm worried that your feelings for her make you vulnerable. I'm worried that your enemies will see her as a target. And I'm worried that if something happens to her, it will destroy you in ways that none of them ever could." Jaewon was silent for a moment. "You're right to worry, but I've spent my entire life being careful. I've calculated every risk, eliminated every weakness, trusted no one. And do you know what it got me? Power, control, survival, loneliness, emptiness, a life that wasn't worth living." He turned to face his secretary fully. "She makes me want to be better. She makes me believe I can be better. I won't give that up, not for safety, not for anything." Secretary Yoon bowed his head. "Then I will do everything in my power to protect her. For you. Thank you, old friend." Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. Soo-min moved out of the small service quarters and into Jaewon's bedroom. She no longer worked as a housekeeper, instead spending her days visiting Eun-ji and Ha-eun, who had been relocated to a nicer apartment closer to good schools and hospitals. The little girl adored Jaewon. She called him Uncle Boss and demanded piggyback rides whenever he visited. He pretended to be annoyed, but Soo-min caught him smiling every time, saw the way his eyes softened when Ha-eun laughed. Eun-ji was more cautious. "He's dangerous," she said to Soo-min during one of their visits. Ha-eun was napping in the other room. "I've heard the stories about his family, about what they do. I know what he is, Grandma. Do you? Because the girl I raised, the one who worked 3 jobs to buy my medicine, that girl knew better than to fall in love with monsters." Soo-min took Eun-ji's weathered hand. "He's not a monster. He's done monstrous things, yes, but he's also kind and gentle and lonely and desperately trying to be better. Doesn't everyone deserve the chance to be better?" Eun-ji sighed. "You sound like me, 40 years ago. I said the same things about your grandfather, and you loved him until the day he died." "I did. But loving him was the hardest thing I ever did. It nearly broke me a dozen times." She squeezed Soo-min's hand. "I don't want that for you. Maybe some things are worth being broken for." Eun-ji looked at her. This girl she had raised. This woman she had watched become strong and compassionate and stubborn beyond reason. And she saw something she hadn't expected. Happiness. "Just be careful," she said finally. "And if he ever hurts you, I don't care how many gangsters he commands. I'll find a way to hurt him back." Soo-min laughed and hugged her. "I know you will, Grandma. I know you will." The trouble began in winter. A rival organization, the Hwang clan, had been pushing into Baeko territory for months. Jaewon had responded with measured force, trying to avoid all-out war, but the Hwangs were hungry, ambitious, and reckless, and their leader, Hwang Jun-sik, was looking for any advantage. He found it in Park Soo-min. "The ghost has a woman," Jun-sik said to his lieutenants, spreading photographs across the table. "A nobody, a cleaner, and from what my sources tell me, he's obsessed with her." "What are you suggesting?" asked his second-in-command. Jun-sik smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "I'm suggesting that we give Kang Jaewon a reason to stop being so careful, a reason to make mistakes, a reason to destroy himself. You want to take her. I want to break him. Taking her is just the method." The plan was set in motion. Soo-min was leaving the hospital when they grabbed her. Eun-ji had had a follow-up appointment, and everything was perfect. The old woman was healthier than she had been in years. Soo-min was walking to her car, head down, checking her phone for messages from Jaewon, when a van screeched up beside her. She didn't even have time to scream. Strong arms grabbed her. A hand clamped over her mouth, and she was thrown into the back of the vehicle. The doors slammed shut. The van sped away. It all happened in less than 30 seconds. Jaewon got the call 20 minutes later. He was in a meeting with his financial advisors, discussing legitimate business investments, when Secretary Yoon burst through the door. One look at his face told Jae-won everything he needed to know. What happened? His voice was ice. Miss Park. She's been taken. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The financial advisors, civilians who had no idea who they were really working for, shifted uncomfortably. Leave us, Jae-won said. They didn't need to be told twice. When the door closed, Jae-won stood. Who? Hwang Jun-sik. He's claiming responsibility. He's demanding. Secretary Yoon swallowed. He's demanding your territories. All of them. In exchange for her life. Jae-won's hands curled into fists. Where is she? We're working on it. Our people are. I want every resource we have on this. Every contact, every informant, every soldier. I want Hwang Jun-sik found. And I want him to know exactly what happens to people who touch what's mine. Sir, if we mobilize that aggressively, there will be war. Then there will be war. Secretary Yoon had never seen his employer like this. Kang Jae-won was known for his cold calculation, his strategic patience, his ability to wait and plan and execute flawlessly. This man, this creature of rage and terror, was something else entirely. Find her, Jae-won said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than any scream. Find her, or I will burn this city to the ground looking for her myself. Sumin woke in darkness. Her head throbbed, and when she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her back. She was lying on a cold, concrete floor in what appeared to be a warehouse or industrial building. Dim light filtered through grimy windows high above. She was not alone. A man stood across the room watching her. He was middle-aged, well-dressed, with an air of smug satisfaction that made her stomach turn. Ah, she's awake, he said, approaching her. Park Soo-min, the woman who captured the ghost's heart. I must say, I expected someone more impressive. Soo-min forced herself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. Crying wouldn't help. She needed to think. Who are you? She asked, pleased that her voice came out steady. Hwang Jun-sik. I'm sure your boyfriend has mentioned me. He hasn't. Jun-sik's smile faltered slightly. No? How disappointing. I'll have to make a more memorable impression then. He crouched down beside her, and Soo-min resisted the urge to flinch away. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to send a message to Kang Jae-won. He's going to hand over his territories, his operations, everything. And when he does, I'll let you go. Simple. He won't do it. Oh, I think he will. From what I've heard, you're quite special to him. Soo-min shook her head. You don't understand. He won't give up his organization. Not for me. Not for anyone. He can't. Can't or won't. Both. The syndicate isn't just his property. It's his responsibility. Thousands of people depend on him. He can't hand that over to someone like you. Jun-sik's face darkened. Someone like me? Someone who would use an innocent woman as a bargaining chip. Someone who has no honor. The slap came fast and hard, snapping her head to the side. Soo-min tasted blood. You should be more careful how you speak to me, Jun-sik said coldly. I don't need you in perfect condition. A few broken bones will still get my message across. Soo-min looked up at him, and despite the fear clawing at her insides, she forced herself to smile. You've already lost, she said. You just don't know it yet. Jae-won received the ransom video 12 hours after Soo-min's kidnapping. It showed her tied to a chair, a fresh bruise blooming on her cheek. Jun-sik stood beside her, delivering his demands with theatrical smugness. But it was Soo-min who captured Jae-won's attention. In the middle of Jun-sik's speech, while his back was turned, Soo-min looked directly at the camera. Her eyes moved deliberately. Left, right, up, down, left, left. Then she blinked rapidly, 3 times, paused, 2 times, paused, 5 times. A code, 325, an address system they had developed together. Half as a joke, half as a precaution. She was telling him where she was. Jae-won's heart surged with pride and relief. His clever, brave, impossible woman. I know where she is, he said. Secretary Yoon looked up from his phone. How? She told me. He didn't explain further. There wasn't time. The assault on Hwang's warehouse was swift and brutal. Jae-won led it personally, something he hadn't done in years. His men had begged him to stay back, to let them handle it. But he refused. This was about more than territory or power. This was about Soo-min. They hit the building from 3 sides at once. Jun-sik's guards, expecting negotiation rather than attack, were overwhelmed within minutes. Jae-won moved through the chaos like a wraith, his gun finding targets with cold precision. He found Jun-sik in the main room using Soo-min as a shield, a knife pressed to her throat. Stay back, Jun-sik screamed. I'll kill her. I swear to God I'll... Jae-won, Soo-min said calmly. He's terrified. His hand is shaking. She was right. Jae-won could see the tremor in Jun-sik's grip, could see the wild fear in his eyes. The man had expected to negotiate from a position of power. He had never imagined that Kang Jae-won would come for him personally, Let her go, Jae-won said. And I'll make it quick. You don't give the orders here. I'm in control. Soo-min moved. She dropped her weight suddenly, twisting away from the knife, and Junsik, startled, lost his grip on her. In the split second that followed, Jae-won raised his gun and fired. The bullet caught Junsik in the shoulder, spinning him around. He crumpled to the ground, screaming in pain. Jae-won was at Soo-min's side in an instant, cutting her bonds, pulling her into his arms. She was shaking finally, the adrenaline fading and the terror catching up. I've got you, he whispered. I've got you. You're safe. I knew you'd come. Always. I'll always come for you. Behind them, Junsik groaned. You haven't won? My family. They'll retaliate. Jae-won turned, keeping Soo-min behind him. He looked down at the man who had dared to take what was his, and there was no mercy in his eyes. Your family will receive what's left of you as a warning, he said, and if any of them ever threatens her again, I will personally erase your entire bloodline from existence. He raised the gun. Soo-min grabbed his arm. Don't. Jae-won looked at her confused. He hurt you. He was going to kill you. I know. But if you execute him like this, you'll start a war that might never end. His family will have to retaliate to save face. More people will die. More blood will be spilled. She cupped his face in her hands. You're better than this. Be better than this. The war inside Jae-won was visible on his face. Every instinct screamed for blood, for vengeance, for the violent justice that had defined his life. But she was looking at him with such faith, such belief that he could choose differently. For her, he could be different for her. He lowered the gun. Take him, he said to his men. Keep him alive. We'll negotiate with his family from a position of strength. As Junsik was dragged away, Jae-won pulled Soo-min close again. You're going to be the death of me, he murmured. Or the saving of you, she replied. I prefer that option. He laughed despite everything, and kissed her forehead, and held her like he would never let go. The aftermath of the kidnapping changed everything. The Hwang clan, faced with the evidence of Junsik's foolishness and the very real threat of Jae-won's wrath, negotiated a surrender. Their territories were absorbed into Baeko's operations, but the bloodshed that Soo-min had feared was avoided. In the syndicate, Soo-min's role changed as well. She was no longer just Jae-won's lover. She had become something else, a symbol, a moral compass. The men who had initially dismissed her as a weakness began to see her differently. She had been captured, threatened, hurt, and she had still managed to communicate vital information to her partner. She had talked Jae-won down from executing an enemy, potentially saving hundreds of lives on both sides. She was strong, she was clever, and she had the ear of the most powerful man in Korean organized crime. They respect you, Jae-won told her one evening, as they stood on the penthouse balcony watching the lights of Seoul. My men, they've started calling you the Heart. Soo-min laughed. That's ridiculous. Is it? You've changed things, Soo-min. You've changed me. She leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her from behind. I didn't do anything except love you. That's everything. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city pulse with life below them. I want to marry you, Jae-won said. Soo-min went very still. I know it's complicated. He continued quickly. My world isn't safe. There will always be people who want to hurt me, and by extension, you. I can't promise you a normal life. I can't promise you peace, but I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I can promise that I will protect you with everything I have. I can promise that you will never be alone again. He turned her to face him. Park Soo-min, will you marry me? Tears streamed down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her, and the city sparkled below them. And for one perfect moment, the world was exactly as it should be. The wedding was held 6 months later. It was a small ceremony, intimate, nothing like the grand affairs that powerful men in Jae-won's position usually threw. Soo-min had insisted on simplicity, and Jae-won had agreed without hesitation. Ha-eun was the flower girl. She walked down the aisle with exaggerated seriousness, scattering petals like she was performing brain surgery. The guests, a mix of Jae-won's most trusted lieutenants and Soo-min's small circle of loved ones, tried not to laugh. Yoon-ji sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Beside her, Secretary Yoon maintained his usual stoic expression, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, and when Soo-min walked down the aisle, dressed in simple white, Jae-won forgot how to breathe. She was beautiful. She was always beautiful. But today, with joy radiating from her face, she was transcendent. You look, he trailed off, unable to find adequate words. You too, she said, squeezing his hands, like a man who finally found what he was looking for. I found her 10 years too late. You found her exactly when you were supposed to. They exchanged vows. Simple ones. Honest ones. Not the flowery promises of fairy tales, but real commitments that acknowledged the complications of their life together. They promised to be honest, to be patient, to support each other through the darkness that would inevitably come. And when they kissed, the small crowd erupted in cheers. Later, at the reception, Yoonji approached Jae-won. "I want to say something to you," she said, her voice stern despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. Jae-won straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am. That girl has been through more hardship than anyone should ever face. She lost her parents, her home, everything. And still, she found room in her heart to love you, with all your complications and dangers and darkness. I know. Do you? Because if you ever make her cry tears of sadness, if you ever make her regret choosing you, I don't care how many soldiers you command. I will find a way to make you pay." Jae-won smiled, the first genuine smile he had ever offered this woman. "I believe you, and I welcome it, because if I ever hurt her, I'll deserve whatever you do to me." Yoonji studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You'll do just fine." She patted his cheek, a gesture that was simultaneously gentle and warning, and walked away. Years passed. Jae-won, under Sumin's influence, began to shift the syndicate's operations. Slowly, carefully, he moved away from the most violent and destructive businesses. The drug trade was shut down. Human trafficking rings were not only abandoned, but actively dismantled. Money was funneled into legitimate enterprises, real estate, technology, entertainment. It wasn't a fairy tale transformation. The syndicate still operated outside the law in many ways. There were still moments of violence, still enemies who needed to be dealt with, still compromises that made Sumin's stomach turn. But it was progress. Hyun grew up healthy and happy and blissfully unaware of her uncle boss's real occupation. She thought he ran a boring investment company, which was technically true now. She excelled in school, developed a passion for music, and had the kind of normal childhood that neither Sumin nor Jae-won had ever experienced. Yoonji lived to see her 90th birthday, surrounded by the family she had created from strangers and orphans. When she finally passed, peaceful and content, she left behind a legacy of love that continued to ripple outward through everyone she had touched. And Sumin and Jae-won, against all odds, were happy. Not perfectly happy, not the uncomplicated bliss of simple lives. There were fights, disagreements, moments when the darkness of his world threatened to overwhelm the light she brought. There were nights when he woke from nightmares, and she held him until the shaking stopped. There were days when she mourned the normal life she might have had, and he reminded her that normal was overrated. But through it all, they had each other. One evening, many years after their first meeting, they stood on the same balcony where he had proposed. The city had changed around them, but their love remained constant. "Do you ever regret it?" Jae-won asked. "Staying with me?" Sumin considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I regret nothing," she said finally. "Every choice I made led me here. To you, to Ha-eun, to this life that's more than I ever dreamed possible. Even the dangerous parts, the scary parts, especially those, they made me stronger. They made us stronger." She turned to look at him, this man who had been monster and savior, enemy and lover, stranger and soulmate. "You asked me once why I wasn't afraid of you. Do you remember what I said? You said you saw a man, a complicated man. I still see him. Every day I see him, and every day I love him more." Jae-won pulled her close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never believed in redemption," he murmured. "Never believed someone like me could deserve happiness. And now I believe in you. That's enough." They stood together as the sun set over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The city hummed with life below them, millions of stories unfolding in the gathering darkness. But their story was the one that mattered. A story of finding light in the darkest places, of love that defied expectation and logic, and every rule they had been taught, of two broken people who somehow made each other whole. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And they